Have you ever stared at an old map, tracing the faded edges of forgotten coastlines and wondering what stories they hold? For centuries, explorers and cartographers sketched islands that, to their certain knowledge, existed in the vast unknown. But today, those very islands have vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers in the yellowed pages of ancient charts. These phantom lands were once real enough to guide ships, inspire legends, and even trigger wars. So what happened to them? Some were mirages, tricks of light and longing. Others may have slipped beneath the waves in cataclysms lost to time. And then there are those that defy explanation, entirely places marked with unwavering confidence on maps for generations, only to dissolve into thin air. This is a journey into the shadows of cartography, where myths blur with reality, and the line between discovery and delusion fades like ink in the rain. Across oceans and epochs, we'll chase 25 of history's most enigmatic vanished islands, each with its own tale of wonder, folly, or tragedy. From the fabled Hy-Brasil, said to shimmer through the Atlantic mist once every 7 years, to the mysterious sandy island near New Caledonia, which appeared on nautical charts for over a century until modern satellites revealed it was never there at all. These aren't just errors, they're puzzles that reveal how deeply human ambition and imagination shape our understanding of the world. What makes these lost lands so haunting isn't just their absence, it's what they say about us. Every vanished island is a mirror reflecting our hunger for the unknown, our courage to sail beyond the edge of the map, and sometimes our stubborn refusal to admit we might be wrong. So let's set sail together through storms of myth and tides of history to uncover why these places captivated minds for generations and why some still believe they're out there waiting to be found. The truth, it's stranger than any legend, and it begins with a single question. If an island disappears from the map, does it ever really exist at all? Among all the vanished islands etched into history, none has captured the imagination quite like Hy-Brasil. This phantom land, said to lie somewhere west of Ireland, wasn't just a cartographer's mistake. It was a legend so persistent that explorers risked their lives for centuries to find it. Medieval maps, like the famous Catalan Atlas from 1375, depicted it as a perfect circle split by a mysterious river, often labeled with a single tantalizing phrase, the island of Brasil. Sailors whispered that it emerged from the Atlantic mist only once every 7 years, cloaked in fog, teasing those who dared to seek it. Some claimed it was home to an advanced civilization, a place where monks preserved ancient knowledge or where giants walked. Others believed it pulsed with magic, its soil rich with gold or its trees glowing with otherworldly light. The stories drove real expeditions. In 1480, the Bristol merchant John Jay sent 2 ships to find it, only to return empty-handed. Decades later, the explorer Pedro de Ayala reported that sailors from Bristol had, in fact, reached Hy-Brasil. Though no proof ever surfaced, the island's allure even seeped into politics. England's King Henry VII once granted a license to hunt for it, blurring the line between myth and ambition. But with each failed voyage, the mystery deepened. Was it a mirage, a trick of light refracting off the ocean, a lost fragment of Atlantis, or something stranger? Hy-Brasil's roots may lie in a simple cartographic error. Some historians argue it was a misinterpretation of real islands like the Azores, distorted over centuries of copying maps by hand. Others think it stemmed from Irish folklore, where Brasil means high king, tying it to myths of a paradisal western land, the most haunting theory. That it was a real place, a shallow shoal or submerged peak, that sank beneath the waves, leaving only echoes in old charts. Yet long after maps erased Hy-Brasil, the legend lived on. As late as 1872, the folklorist Patrick Weston Joyce recorded Irish fishermen swearing they'd seen its cliffs rise from the sea at dawn, only to vanish by noon. Even today, satellite scans and sonar maps show nothing where Hy-Brasil was once drawn with certainty. But that's the power of these phantom islands. They're not just about geography. They're about the human longing to believe there's still something left to discover, some corner of the map where magic might still be real. And who's to say Hy-Brasil isn't still out there, waiting for the right day, the right light to show itself once more? If Hy-Brasil represents the mystique of the Atlantic, then Atlantis is the grandmaster of all vanished islands, a legend so colossal it's etched into global consciousness. Unlike most phantom lands, Atlantis didn't fade quietly from maps. It exploded into myth thanks to the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, who first described it around 360 BC. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, he painted it as an advanced maritime empire, a circular utopia of concentric rings brimming with palaces, harbors, and temples clad in precious metals. But its people grew arrogant, and in a single catastrophic day and night, the gods sent earthquakes and floods to swallow the island whole, burying its glory beneath the sea. What makes Atlantis extraordinary isn't just its story, but how fiercely people have tried to pin it to reality. Plato claimed it lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, modern-day Gibraltar, leading generations to scour the Atlantic. Others argue he meant the Mediterranean, pointing to the volcanic island of Santorini, where a massive eruption around 1600 BC obliterated the Minoan civilization, eerily mirroring Plato's tale. Then there are the fringe theories: Antarctica, the Caribbean, even the Sahara. Each claim reveals more about the seekers than the sought. For some, Atlantis is a cautionary tale of hubris; for others, proof of lost high technology. The Nazi regime funded expeditions to find it, hoping to uncover Aryan roots. Modern fringe authors insist it housed extraterrestrials or energy crystals. Science hasn't been silent either. Oceanographers have mapped the seafloor for decades, finding no trace of Plato's rings. But that hasn't stopped sonar discoveries, like the so-called Bimini Road in the Bahamas, a natural rock formation some swear is Atlantean pavement. Even satellites join the hunt, with Google Earth briefly fueling frenzy over grid-like patterns off Africa's coast, later debunked as sonar artifacts. The irony: Plato likely invented Atlantis as a political allegory, a fictional critique of Athenian imperialism. But as historian Charles Orser put it, the idea of Atlantis is like a blank screen onto which people project their fantasies. And oh, how we've projected, from Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea to Disney's animated utopia, Atlantis morphs with each retelling. It's a superhero hideout in DC Comics, a psychedelic ruin in Doctor Who, and a meme-worthy mystery in internet lore. This cultural grip isn't just nostalgia, it taps into something primal. Atlantis is the ultimate what if, a mirror for our fears of ecological collapse, our ache for golden ages, and the nagging sense that greatness might be buried just out of reach. So does Atlantis exist? Maybe not in the way Plato described, but as long as there are uncharted depths both in the ocean and the human imagination, it will never truly vanish. Because sometimes the most powerful islands aren't made of land, but of the stories we refuse to let sink. Far to the north, beyond the icy fjords and storm-lashed coasts where ancient Greek explorers dared not sail, lay a place so shrouded in mystery that its very name became synonymous with the edge of the world, Thule. First mentioned by the geographer Pytheas of Massalia around 320 BC, this fabled island was said to lie 6 days' voyage north of Britain, where the sun barely set in summer and the sea congealed into a frozen slush. Pytheas called it the land where the elements mingle, a phrase that would echo through centuries, morphing with each retelling. But here's the puzzle: no two maps agreed on where Thule actually was. Some placed it near Norway, others near Iceland, Greenland, or even the Shetland Islands. Like a mirage on the horizon, it kept slipping just out of reach. What makes Thule fascinating isn't just its elusive location, it's how it straddled the line between science and myth. Roman writers like Tacitus and Virgil used it as poetic shorthand for the absolute frontier, the last outpost before the unknown. In Norse sagas, it blurred into legends of Ultima Thule, a frozen realm of gods and giants. By the Middle Ages, it had become less a place and more an idea, a symbol of human curiosity pushing against the limits of the imaginable. Even early modern explorers couldn't resist the name. When Danish adventurers established a trading post in Greenland in the 17th century, they called it Thule, as if to plant a flag on the myth itself. Theories about Thule's true identity are as varied as the stars. Some scholars argue Pythias was describing Norway's coastline, where the midnight sun dances on the water. Others insist it was Iceland, citing his account of volcanic activity, though he visited centuries before Norse settlers arrived. The wildest claims tie it to Hy-Brasil, a mythical Arctic paradise where Apollo wintered among a race of golden-haired giants. And then there's the Nazi twist. In the 1920s, occultists linked Thule to a lost Aryan homeland, warping its legend into something dark and divisive. Yet perhaps the most haunting clue comes from climate change. Recent studies suggest Pythias might have sailed during a warm period when ice sheets retreated, revealing islands now submerged or reshaped by glaciers. Could Thule have been a real place that literally melted off the map? The irony is rich. A land once synonymous with the unattainable may have vanished not into myth but into rising seas. Today, Thule lingers in the names of air bases, research stations, and even a moon of Saturn. It's a reminder that every era has its edges, its own Thules, places just beyond comprehension that taunt us with the promise of discovery. And who knows, maybe that's the point. Some islands aren't meant to be found. They exist to keep us searching. While Thule taunted explorers in the frozen north, another phantom island lured sailors westward into the Atlantic's uncharted waters, Antillia, the legendary Island of the Seven Cities. First appearing on maps in the early 15th century, this mysterious landmass was often drawn as a large, rectangular island southwest of Portugal, sometimes flanked by smaller isles like companions in a ghostly archipelago. But Antillia wasn't just another cartographic blunder. It was woven into the fabric of Iberian identity, a beacon of hope and defiance. According to lore, when Muslim forces conquered the Iberian Peninsula in the 8th century, 7 Visigothic bishops fled with their congregations, sailing into the unknown until they found an island where they founded 7 glorious cities. Over centuries, these settlements supposedly flourished into a Christian utopia, untouched by Moorish rule, a story that mixed faith, politics, and longing into a potent myth. The tale gained such traction that Antillia became a fixture on maps, including the influential 1459 chart by the Venetian cartographer Fra Mauro. Sailors whispered of encounters, claiming to glimpse its shores or meet fishermen who'd traded with its inhabitants. Even Christopher Columbus took note. His brother Bartolomeo's maps reportedly marked Antillia as a waypoint, fueling theories that the legend nudged Columbus toward his fateful westward voyage in 1492. Some speculate he mistook the Caribbean islands for Antillia's fabled cities, hence the modern name Antilles for that island chain. But was there any truth to the legend? Geologists point to the Azores, 900 miles west of Portugal, as a possible inspiration. The island's dramatic cliffs and geothermal activity might have seemed otherworldly to early explorers. Others argue Antillia was a misreading of older maps, where Septum Civitate's 7 cities referred to actual settlements in Galicia, Spain, later mischarted as an island. The most tantalizing theory ties it to the Red Island mentioned in Arab texts, possibly a mangled account of Madeira or the Canary Islands. Yet Antillia's grip on the imagination outlasted its place on maps. As late as the 1700s, Spanish explorers in North America searched for the 7 cities of gold, a myth that likely sprouted from Antillia's roots. Today, the island lives on in literature and gaming, from fantasy novels to the digital realms of Assassin's Creed. It's a testament to how a story can shape history, how a refuge for the desperate became a compass for the bold, guiding real ships toward unreal shores. Antillia may have faded from charts, but like all great phantom islands, it never truly disappeared. It simply sailed into legend. Long before Columbus set sail, another legend of the sea captured the hearts of medieval Europe: the story of St. Brendan's Island, a paradisiacal land supposedly discovered by a 6th century Irish monk on a voyage so miraculous it blurred the line between faith and cartography. St. Brendan the Navigator, as he became known, was said to have embarked on a 7-year journey across the Atlantic with a band of monks, seeking earthly manifestations of divine wonder. Manuscripts like the Navigatio Sancti Brendani describe encounters with crystal pillars rising from the sea, mountains breathing fire, and an island so lush it could only be Eden's echo. This mystical isle first appeared on maps in the 12th century, often nestled west of Ireland or north of the Canary Islands. Cartographers like Abraham Ortelius included it as late as the 1500s, sometimes labeling it the Isle of the Blessed. Sailors whispered that it was cloaked in perpetual mist, visible only to the pure of heart. Portuguese explorers even claimed to have landed there in the 1400s, reporting fragrant forests and rivers running with gold, though their coordinates mysteriously shifted with each retelling. But was St. Brendan's Island more than a pious fable? Some scholars argue it was inspired by real Atlantic landfalls like Madeira or the Azores, where volcanic activity might explain tales of fire-breathing peaks. Others propose the Canary Islands, whose subtropical splendor could match medieval descriptions of paradise. The boldest theory, that Brendan's voyage reached North America, a claim bolstered by Tim Severin's 1977 experiment, where a reconstructed leather-hulled boat made it from Ireland to Newfoundland using only 6th century technology. Yet the island's true power lies in its symbolism. For medieval Christians, it wasn't just a place, it was proof that faith could conquer the unknown. Even as maps grew more accurate, the legend persisted, morphing into a metaphor for spiritual quests. Today, satellite imagery confirms no such island exists where Brendan's was charted. But like all great phantom lands, it endures not as a geographic error, but as a testament to the human spirit's refusal to let fact extinguish wonder. Perhaps that's why, centuries later, we're still searching, not for an island, but for the boldness to believe in marvels just beyond the horizon. Far north in the frigid waters between Greenland and Iceland, there once lay an island that shouldn't have existed, Buss Island, a stubborn cartographic ghost that refused to vanish for over 200 years. It first appeared in the chaotic wake of Martin Frobisher's Arctic expeditions, when in 1578, sailors aboard the vessel Emmanuel, affectionately nicknamed Buss, claimed to have spotted an uncharted landmass teeming with wildlife. The crew described low, green hills and shoals perfect for fishing, sparking immediate interest from European mapmakers eager to fill the blank spaces of the North Atlantic. Within decades, Buss Island was etched onto prestigious maps, including John Sellers' English Pilot of 1671, where it sat conspicuously southeast of Greenland. But from the beginning, something felt off. Subsequent explorers either failed to find the island entirely or reported coordinates that shifted like ice flows in the current. In 1675, the Danish captain Thomas Shepard allegedly landed there, describing it as a melancholy place with no trace of the lush meadows first reported. By the 1700s, skepticism grew, especially when meticulous surveys by the Hudson's Bay Company found only empty ocean where Buss Island should have been. Yet cartographers kept drawing it, sometimes moving it farther east or shrinking its size, but rarely admitting it might not exist at all. So what explains this persistent phantom? The most plausible theory points to a colossal misreading of Greenland's coastline. The Emmanuel's crew may have encountered the southern tip of Greenland during summer months, when melting ice revealed grassy slopes that, from a distance, could mimic an independent island. Others suggest an iceberg mirage. In Arctic conditions, temperature inversions can warp light, making distant ice appear as solid land hovering above the horizon. There's also the possibility of navigational errors. 16th century sailors relied on dead reckoning, where even small mistakes in tracking speed or currents could create islands that later expeditions couldn't replicate. Yet Buss Island's grip on maps outlasted logic. Its longevity reveals a fascinating quirk of early cartography, the reluctance to admit errors. Once an island appeared on a respected map, removing it required more bravery than leaving it in. New editions often copied older sources wholesale, perpetuating mistakes across generations. Some mapmakers, aware of the doubt, began labeling Buss Island with cautious phrases like "land supposed to be here," but still couldn't bring themselves to erase it entirely. The island's final disappearance came courtesy of cold, hard data. In the early 19th century, British naval surveys confirmed the absence of any landmass in Buss's supposed location. Yet even then, the legend clung to life in whalers' tales and regional folklore, where it morphed into a kind of Arctic brigadoon, a land that appeared only to the worthy. Today, the story endures as a cautionary tale about the seductive power of maps, because sometimes the most stubborn islands aren't made of rock but of ink and human stubbornness. Imagine an island so convincingly real that kings funded voyages to reach it, and even the most meticulous mapmakers swore by its existence only for it to dissolve into thin air. That's the story of Frisland, a phantom that haunted Atlantic cartography for over 100 years, sprawling across maps from Venice to London as if it had every right to be there. Unlike Hy-Brasil or Antillia, born from folklore, Frisland's origins were far more mischievous. It sprang to life in the 1550s, courtesy of two Venetian brothers, Niccolo and Antonio Zeno. Their published account, the Zeno Map, claimed to document a 14th century voyage to the North Atlantic, complete with dramatic encounters in a land they called Frisland. The problem, it was almost certainly a fabrication, a mix of family legend, misunderstood geography, and outright invention. Yet the Zeno brothers' tale spread like wildfire. Their map depicted Frisland as a sizable island south of Iceland, packed with cities like Bondenden and Seinstul, and it was copied uncritically by cartographers for generations. The confusion deepened because Frisland wasn't entirely imaginary. It borrowed details from real places. Some historians argue the name came from a misreading of Faroes, or even a distorted version of Iceland's eastern region, Fjalasund. Others think the Zeno brothers conflated stories from Norse sagas with their own embellishments. Whatever the case, their creation took on a life of its own, warping exploration for decades. The most famous victim of the Frisland fever, John Cabot, the Italian explorer who sailed under England's flag. In 1497, Cabot's logs mention landing on a new isle, which some scholars believe was actually Newfoundland. But thanks to the Zeno map's influence, later interpreters insisted he'd reached Frisland instead. This mix-up sent explorers chasing shadows, wasting time and resources on a place that never was. Even as late as the 1600s, ships reported sighting Frisland's misty cliffs only to realize they'd stumbled upon Greenland or the Faroe Islands. What makes Frisland uniquely frustrating is how long it clung to maps despite mounting evidence. Renowned cartographers like Gerardus Mercator and Abraham Ortelius included it in their atlases, often with cautious notes about conflicting reports. But removing it meant admitting error, and in an age when maps were both science and art, pride kept phantom islands alive. Only in the 17th century, as navigation tools improved, did Frisland finally fade, though not without a fight. Some maps relabeled it Fixland or Friesland as if hedging their bets. Frisland's legacy isn't just about a hoax, it's a masterclass in how easily fiction can shape reality. The Zeno brothers never imagined their story would mislead kings and explorers, but once their island took root in the collective imagination, it became as real as any rock in the ocean. And that's the danger of phantom lands. They remind us that maps aren't just records of the world. They're also records of our mistakes, our hopes, and sometimes our willingness to believe a good story. Of all the phantom islands that chilled the bones of sailors, none struck fear like the Isle of Demons, a cursed sliver of land said to bristle with shrieking spirits and beasts that clawed at ships daring to anchor near its shores. First appearing on maps in the early 1500s, this nightmarish place was often drawn off the coast of Newfoundland or Labrador, sometimes labeled Isla de Demonios or Isle des Demons, with hastily sketched devilish figures lurking in its margins. Portuguese and French explorers told identical tales. Approach those fog-wrapped cliffs and you'd hear unearthly howls, see shadowy figures darting between trees, feel an oppressive dread clinging to the air like brine. Some swore the island itself was alive, a kind of purgatory where lost souls were imprisoned to torment the living. But the most haunting chapter of this legend isn't supernatural, it's heartbreakingly human. In 1542, a young French noblewoman named Marguerite de la Roque boarded a ship bound for New France, only to become entangled in a scandal, perhaps a forbidden romance with a fellow passenger. As punishment, her cousin, the expedition's leader, abandoned her on the Isle of Demons with only a musket, a Bible, and a servant girl. The servant died within months, and Marguerite's ordeal became the stuff of nightmares. Contemporary accounts, including one by Queen Marguerite of Navarre, describe her battling unseen demons that assailed her day and night, fending off bears and surviving winters in a cave. Yet against all odds, she endured for 2 years before being rescued by Basque fishermen. Her story blurred fact and folklore, transforming the island from cartographic oddity to a symbol of both terror and tenacity. What explains these chilling legends? The island's likely real-world counterpart, Quebec's Isle aux Demons, offers clues. Located near the mouth of the St. Lawrence River, it's a windswept place where walruses once bellowed in the fog, a sound easily mistaken for otherworldly screams. Others point to Isle Fishot, where strange magnetic anomalies may have disrupted compasses, disorienting sailors. Then there's the psychological angle. Isolation and extreme conditions breed hallucinations. Imagine being trapped in that grey wilderness where every rustle in the undergrowth could be a predator or something worse. Yet the Isle of Demons vanished from maps by the 17th century, not because the fear faded, but because the unknown became known. As explorers charted Canada's coastlines, the demons were revealed as ordinary wildlife, the screams as seabirds or wind through ravines. But Marguerite's story endured, retold for centuries as a parable of resilience. In a way, the island did harbor spirits, not hellish ones, but the ghosts of human fear and wonder, those twin forces that once populated blank spaces on maps with monsters. Today, all that remains is a name on old parchment and a question: were the demons ever on the island or in the minds of those who believed in them? Off the foggy edges of medieval maps, curled like a sly smile in the Atlantic, sat Mayda, a crescent-shaped mystery that taunted navigators for centuries. Unlike other phantom islands with grandiose legends, Mayda was subtle, appearing as early as the 1300s on charts near Ireland or sometimes off North America's coast, always with that same distinctive arc. Some maps gave it ominous aliases: Asmeda, Isle of Evil, or Hand of Satan, hinting at shipwrecks or drowned souls. Yet for all its ominous aura, Mayda's origins were likely more mundane. The name itself might have stemmed from the Arabic al-Mayda, meaning the level place, suggesting Arab sailors passed down garbled accounts of real landfalls. What made Mayda so persistent was its chameleon-like ability to shift locations and identities. Portuguese explorers placed it near the Azores, while French cartographers nudged it toward Newfoundland. In the 1540s, the famed mapmaker Sebastian Munster drew it as a perfect crescent west of Ireland, fueling theories it was a distorted version of the Aran Islands or even a misremembered glimpse of Cape Cod. And here's where the shipwreck tales crept in. Mariners whispered that Mayda's curved bay was a death trap, its waters littered with broken hulls, a warning that likely deterred some while enticing others to prove it myth. The island's slow fade from maps reveals a quiet drama of cartographic ego. By the 1700s, navigators like Captain John Smith of Pocahontas fame openly doubted Mayda's existence, yet it clung to charts like a barnacle. Some mapmakers, unsure but unwilling to erase it, shrunk it to a speck or labeled it dubious. The final nail came in 1814, when the British Admiralty's rigorous surveys declared the Atlantic void of Mayda's crescent. Yet even today, some wonder if it was a real sandbank swallowed by rising seas or a collective mirage, a lesson that sometimes the ocean's greatest trick isn't hiding islands, but convincing us they were ever there at all. Of all the phantom islands that ever tricked the modern world, none is as audacious as Sandy Island, a place that lounged on maps for over a century, bold as brass until science finally called its bluff. Nestled in the Coral Sea near New Caledonia, this slender streak of land first appeared on British charts in the late 1800s, labeled with the disarmingly bland name Sandy Island. For generations, no one questioned it. Ships steered clear of its supposed shores, and atlases from National Geographic to Google Earth faithfully included it as a geographic fact. Then, in 2012, an Australian research vessel sailed directly to its coordinates and found nothing but empty ocean stretching 1,300 meters deep. The revelation sent shockwaves through the cartographic community. How could an island vanish when it was never there to begin with? The answer lies in a comedy of errors spanning 2 centuries. The earliest reference may trace back to the whaling ship Velocity in 1876, whose captain logged a heavy breakers and sandy isle in the area, likely spotting a temporary sandbar or misreading waves cresting over a reef. That single note, copied uncritically by hydrographers, became immortalized in official charts. Worse, Sandy Island's persistence was turbocharged by the digital age. As paper maps were digitized, the phantom slipped into databases, replicating like a virus across global platforms. No one bothered to check because, well, why would they? The island had the ultimate camouflage, sheer mundanity. But Sandy Island's story isn't just about a mistake, it's about the fragility of human knowledge. In an era when we trust satellites to guide our cars and phones, this ghost island exposed how even today, our maps are riddled with inherited assumptions. Scientists now joke that Sandy Island belongs to the least exclusive club on Earth, phantom lands confirmed by their absence. The incident forced cartographers to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the most stubborn obstacles to discovery aren't uncharted waters, but the marks we've already inked with too much confidence. And here's the kicker: Sandy Island might have a real-world counterpart. Some researchers speculate the Velocity's crew saw pumice rafts floating mats of volcanic rock that mimic land from a distance. Others suggest a coral reef that eroded below the tide line. But the most compelling theory, that Sandy Island was always a collective hallucination, a shared fiction we clung to because erasing it felt riskier than leaving it in. After all, admitting a century of maps were wrong is harder than pretending a speck of sand might still be out there. So the next time you glance at a map, remember, every line is a story, and some of those stories are tall tales waiting to be debunked. Sandy Island may be gone, but its legacy lingers a wink from the ocean, reminding us that not all that's missing is lost. Sometimes it was never there at all. Off the coast of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, where turquoise waters hide vast reserves of oil, There once sat an island named Bermuda, marked on maps as early as the 1500s, then abruptly erased by the 20th century as if the sea had swallowed it whole. Unlike other phantom islands born from folklore, Bermuda's disappearance wasn't just a cartographic curiosity. It became a geopolitical firestorm. Spanish charts from the 1600s placed it squarely in the Gulf of Mexico, roughly 100 miles north of Campeche. For centuries, its existence was uncontested until the 1970s, when Mexico and the United States began negotiating maritime boundaries in oil-rich waters. Suddenly, Bermuda's coordinates mattered immensely. If it existed, Mexico's exclusive economic zone would expand by thousands of square miles, granting it rights to underwater oil reserves worth billions. But when surveyors rushed to locate it, they found only open ocean where the island should have been. Theories about Bermuda's fate spiral from the plausible to the outrageous. Some oceanographers suggest it was a low-lying sandbank eroded by hurricanes or rising sea levels, a victim of natural forces. Others point to errors in Chinese letter navigation, where shoals or mirages were mistaken for permanent land. But the most explosive claims came from conspiracy circles. Mexican politicians and journalists openly speculated that the United States had destroyed Bermuda to shrink Mexico's territorial claims, either by detonating it or triggering underwater landslides. Rumors swirled of covert operations, with whispers that the CIA had deployed submarines to erase the island from existence. Even academics joined the fray. A 2009 investigation by Mexico's National Autonomous University concluded the island had never existed, yet failed to explain why so many historical maps, including an 1858 U.S. Navy chart, had included it with confidence. The search for Bermuda became a national obsession. Expeditions launched in 1997, 2008, and 2009 scoured the Gulf with sonar, submersibles, and satellite imaging, all turning up empty. The ocean floor there plunges to depths of over 4,000 feet, far too deep for any island to have sunk without leaving traces. Skeptics argue Bermuda was a classic case of phantom cartography, where early mapmakers copied each other's errors without verification. Yet the timing of its disappearance from official records coinciding with oil negotiations fuels lingering doubts. Could greed have rewritten geography? Bermuda's legacy lingers like a ghost in Mexico's national consciousness. It's a cautionary tale about how borders, resources, and power can distort even the most basic facts. Modern maps no longer include the island, but its shadow haunts discussions of sovereignty and the fragile line between myth and manipulation. Perhaps the most unsettling question isn't whether Bermuda existed, but why we're so eager to believe in plots instead of admitting how little we truly know about the sea and the stories we've sunk into its depths. South of the Falkland Islands, where the Atlantic meets the Southern Ocean's fury, three phantom sisters once danced on the horizon, the Auroras. These elusive islands, named Aurora, Isles of Aurora, and Sandy Island, not to be confused with its Coral Sea namesake, flickered in and out of navigational records between the 1700s and early 1900s, taunting sailors with their shifting coordinates. British mariners first reported them in 1762, describing low, sandy shores shrouded in mist. Yet by 1856, the Royal Navy's HMS Mermaid scoured the area and found only empty waves. So how did these spectral landmasses cling to maps for over a century? The answer lies where desperation meets illusion in the planet's most treacherous waters. The Aurora's persistence stems from the chaotic nature of early polar exploration. Whalers and seal hunters, drawn south by fortunes in blubber and fur, often sailed in perpetual twilight where fog and ice warped perception. A veteran of these voyages, Captain James Weddell of Weddell Sea fame, theorized that the Auroras were mirages, floating icebergs capped with dark debris that from a distance mimicked land. In the Southern Ocean's twilight, a berg's reflection could stretch into a false coastline, especially under the eerie glow of the actual aurora australis. Other accounts suggest navigational drift. Ships relying on dead reckoning in strong currents might log the same discovery hundreds of miles apart without realizing their error. Yet the auroras had a cultural staying power beyond mere mistakes. In an era when Britain and Spain jockeyed for control of the Falklands, uncharted islands symbolized unclaimed resources. The auroras marked near-contested waters became pawns in geopolitical games. Maps commissioned by competing naval powers often included them as doubtful but left them in hedging bets. Even the great American navigator Nathaniel Bowditch kept them in his New American Practical Navigator as late as 1826, a testament to how institutional caution prolonged cartographic ghosts. The final twist, modern oceanography, suggests the auroras might have been real briefly. Submarine volcanoes in the Scotia Arc occasionally spew up temporary pumice banks or shift seamounts close to the surface. One such event in 1964 birthed a new island near Iceland. Could the auroras have been similar geological hiccups erased by waves before proper documentation? We'll never know for certain, but their legacy endures as a masterclass in how the Antarctic's mercurial nature, both environmental and political, can conjure land from longing, then dissolve it into the next storm. In the stormy waters east of Patagonia, where the Atlantic claws at the edges of the known world, a stubborn cartographic ghost once lurked, Pepys Island. This phantom land first appeared in the logs of the English privateer William Ambrose Cowley in 1683, a year when piracy and exploration blurred into a single daring profession. Sailing home after plundering Spanish settlements along the Pacific, Cowley's crew spotted what they described as a steep, wooded island teeming with seabirds. In a flourish of flattery, or perhaps opportunism, Cowley named it after Samuel Pepys, the famed diarist and secretary of the Admiralty, who'd never set foot anywhere near the South Atlantic. The gesture might have been forgotten had Cowley's journal not fallen into the hands of mapmakers, who eagerly stamped Pepys Island onto charts just northwest of the Falklands. What followed was a comedy of errors that lasted nearly a century. Sailors returning from the region reported wildly conflicting coordinates, some placing Pepys Island hundreds of miles from Cowley's original claim. The confusion deepened because the Falkland Islands, then poorly charted, were often mistaken for Pepys Island or vice versa. Even the legendary British navigator James Cook weighed in during his 1769 voyage, noting dryly that after scouring the area he found no such island. Yet Pepys Island clung to maps like a barnacle, its persistence revealing a delicious irony. The very bureaucracy Pepys once oversaw, the British Admiralty, kept replicating the error in official charts long after evidence debunked it. The island's legacy isn't just about a mislabeled rock. It's a case study in how exploration myths snowballed. Cowley, it turns out, likely misidentified one of the Falklands' smaller islets, but his vague descriptions allowed later cartographers to relocate Pepys Island wherever blanks needed filling. Some historians speculate the name itself became a placeholder, a way for sailors to log unfamiliar landfalls without admitting they were lost, the most poetic theory. That Cowley saw a particularly dense, low-hanging fog bank, its outline sharpened by the golden hour light, and mistook it for solid ground. Pepys Island finally vanished from maps by the early 1800s, but its namesake's connection lived on in an unexpected way. Samuel Pepys, the man who famously chronicled London's daily life, became forever tied to a place that never existed, a whimsical footnote in the history of human error. And perhaps that's the real lesson here. In an age when every inch of our planet is mapped and surveilled, Pepys Island reminds us that even the most confident lines on a chart were once just stories, scribbled by weary sailors under a spray of stars, hoping, maybe even pretending, they'd found something new. The Arctic has always been a realm of illusions, a place where the cold plays tricks on the mind, bending light and distorting reality. but few mirages were as costly or as stubborn as Crocker Land, a phantom continent supposedly glimpsed by the famed explorer Robert Peary in 1906 during his relentless push toward the North Pole. Peary, already a celebrity for his polar exploits, reported seeing a vast, snow-capped landmass rising from the ice far to the northwest of Ellesmere Island. He named it after George Crocker, a banker who funded his expeditions, and confidently marked its location on maps. The discovery seemed legitimate. Peary was no amateur. Yet Crocker Land existed only in the fractured light of the Arctic air, a trick of refraction known as a superior mirage, where distant ice or clouds appear elevated and distorted into the semblance of solid ground. The myth hardened into fact when Peary's protege, Donald Macmillan, led a 1913 expedition to chart this new frontier. Sponsored by the American Museum of Natural History and backed by wealthy patrons, the team spent years battling sub-zero temperatures, dwindling supplies, and the creeping realization that their quest was futile. Macmillan's own journal captures the moment of truth. After sledging hundreds of miles across treacherous ice, his Inuit guide, Piugatok, stared at the horizon and uttered a phrase that would haunt polar history: "Tornarsak, the devil is mocking us." The mountains they'd been chasing dissolved into the sky. Crocker Land was nothing more than an Arctic phantom, a Fata Morgana mirage stretching the icy horizon into a cruel joke. What makes Crocker Land uniquely tragic is the scale of its deception. Unlike fleeting sailors' tales, this illusion was endorsed by one of the era's most trusted explorers, locking entire institutions into its grip. The 1913 expedition wasted lives and fortunes. 2 men nearly died on a futile side quest to find another non-existent island, Crozier Land, and the team barely escaped the Arctic before winter trapped them. Yet even after Macmillan's debunking, maps were slow to erase Crocker Land. Some atlases kept it as a doubtful feature into the 1920s, a testament to how hard it is to unbelieve a lie wrapped in the authority of a hero. The science behind the mirage is as fascinating as the folly it caused. In polar regions, temperature inversions where cold air near the ground sits beneath warmer layers can bend light so dramatically that objects below the horizon appear to float above it. Ships, icebergs, even entire coastlines can seem to hover in the sky, their shapes stretched and blurred into unrecognizable forms. Peary likely saw a distorted slice of Ellesmere Island or Greenland, warped by atmospheric conditions into a tantalizing new land. The same phenomenon birthed other phantom islands, but Crocker Land stands apart because of the sheer weight of human ambition poured into chasing it. Today, Crocker Land lingers as a cautionary tale about the dangers of confirmation bias in exploration. Peary, desperate to cement his legacy after the controversial claims of his North Pole conquest, might have seen what he wanted to see. And the scientific establishment, eager for new frontiers, failed to question him rigorously. In the end, the Arctic didn't hide Crocker Land. It revealed how easily even the most disciplined minds can be fooled when the stakes are high enough. The land that never was serves as a reminder. Sometimes the greatest discoveries aren't what we find, but what we stop pretending exists. Deep in the storm-lashed waters of the Southern Ocean, where icebergs loom like shattered cathedrals, there once appeared, and just as mysteriously vanished, Doherty Island. This phantom land first entered the record books in 1841, when Captain John Doherty of the whaler James Stewart logged its coordinates roughly halfway between Cape Horn and Antarctica. His description was oddly specific: a rugged, snow-capped island about 5 miles long, its cliffs alive with seabirds. Other ships soon corroborated the sighting, and by the 1860s, Doherty Island had secured its place on Admiralty charts as a reliable landmark for vessels braving the Drake Passage. But when explorers finally went looking for it in earnest, the island performed its greatest trick. It disappeared without a trace. The mystery of Doherty Island isn't just about a missing landmass, it's about how easily the brutal Antarctic environment can deceive even seasoned mariners. One theory points to colossal tabular icebergs, which often break off from ice shelves and drift north, their flat surfaces dusted with rock and debris that mimic terrestrial shores. In the fog and glare of polar waters, such bergs can appear stationary for weeks, tricking crews into mistaking them for permanent islands. Another possibility lies in navigational drift. Before modern GPS, ships relied on celestial sightings and dead reckoning, where slight errors in tracking currents or wind could compound over thousands of miles. Captain Doherty might have misjudged his position by a mere 50 nautical miles, enough to displace a real island into empty ocean. Yet Doherty Island's most fascinating chapter unfolded in the early 20th century, when the race to map Antarctica turned it into a cartographic battleground. Despite mounting skepticism, expeditions kept including it on maps as doubtful or unconfirmed, partly because erasing it felt riskier than leaving it in. In 1931, the British research vessel Discovery Roman II conducted a thorough search, crisscrossing the island's supposed location with sonar. Their findings: open water nearly 2 miles deep. Still, as late as 1949, Soviet atlases stubbornly marked Doherty Island with a question mark, a nod to Cold War-era caution about conceding errors to Western science. What makes this phantom island so emblematic is the lesson it holds for modern exploration. In an age when satellites map every inch of the planet, Doherty Island reminds us that some discoveries were never about land at all, but about the gaps in our perception. The Southern Ocean, with its mirages and mutable horizons, taught generations of sailors a humbling truth. Sometimes the most enduring myths aren't carved in stone but sculpted from ice and longing. And though Doherty Island is gone from our charts, it lingers as a monument to the greatest explorers' challenge, knowing when to stop believing your own eyes. South of the bustling trade routes that once connected Europe to the Indies, there drifted a lonely legend, Saxemberg Island, a Dutch mariner's dream of paradise gone rogue. First spotted in 1670 by the captain of the Dutch East India Company ship Saxemberg, this phantom island was said to rise from the South Atlantic like a forgotten jewel, its slopes lush with wild celery and towering trees, crowned by a solitary peak so symmetrical it seemed carved by divine hand. Unlike the ominous Isle of Demons or the shifting sands of Hy-Brasil, Saxemberg promised sanctuary, a place where weary sailors could restock fresh water and food before braving the tempests of Cape Horn. For over a century, that promise lured ships off course. British and French navigators recorded its coordinates, and maps etched it carefully west of Tristan da Cunha. But every expedition sent to confirm its existence returned baffled. In 1721, the British vessel HMS Richmond scoured the area, finding only empty ocean. Dutch captains argued the island was real but shy, its location obscured by storms or currents. Even the legendary Captain James Cook, en route to his fateful Pacific voyages, noted the discrepancy in 1775, writing that Saxemberg must be struck from the charts, yet it clung on, stubborn as a barnacle. The truth, when it finally emerged, was a lesson in the perils of wishful geography. Saxemberg's descriptions matched Tristan da Cunha, a real volcanic island in the region, but with one critical flaw: early navigators had misplotted its longitude by hundreds of miles. The Dutch captain likely saw Tristan through a haze, its silhouette warped by distance and fatigue, and christened it anew without realizing his error. As later explorers sharpened their tools and techniques, the fertile plains of Saxemberg resolved into Tristan's rugged cliffs, its solitary mountain into the unmistakable cone of Queen Mary's Peak. Yet Saxemberg's ghost lingered in the maritime imagination. Whalers whispered of spotting its verdant slopes just beyond the fog, only to watch them dissolve at dawn. Some charts kept it as late as 1850, labeled doubtful but never quite erased, perhaps because every sailor wanted it to be real, a haven in the merciless Atlantic, proof that the sea might sometimes offer kindness instead of cruelty. Today, satellites have scanned every inch of that ocean, confirming what the Richmond's crew suspected 3 centuries ago. Saxemberg was never there. But like all great phantom islands, its legacy isn't in the rock it lacked, but the hope it carried. A floating testament to the fact that even the hardest navigators among us sometimes need to believe in rest. Amid the icebergs and howling winds of the Southern Ocean, where the light plays tricks and the cold numbs reason, there once glimmered a legend in shades of impossible green, Emerald Island. First charted in 1821 by British sealer Captain William Elliot, this phantom land was said to rise from the Antarctic waters like a piece of the Irish countryside flung to the ends of the earth, its cliffs draped in vibrant moss or perhaps even dense vegetation. For decades, maps marked it northeast of the Balleny Islands, a splash of color in a world of white and blue. Whalers spoke of its eerie glow under the midnight sun, while scientists scribbled theories about how life could thrive so far south. Yet by the early 20th century, the emerald had faded from charts as suddenly as it appeared, leaving behind a mystery as slippery as an ice floe. What made Emerald Island so tantalizing wasn't just its color, but its defiance of logic. Antarctica's shores are famously barren, a realm of rock and ice where even lichens cling by a thread. Yet here was an island supposedly green enough to catch the eye from miles away. Some sailors speculated it was a volcanic outcrop, warmed by geothermal vents that created microclimates. Others whispered of optical illusions, the way low-hanging sun could turn glacial ice blue-green, or how certain algae blooms might coat icebergs in temporary emerald films. The most poetic theory came from Arctic veterans who knew how layers of compacted snow could filter light into otherworldly hues, creating jade bergs that drifted like misplaced jewels. The truth, when it finally emerged, was both simpler and stranger. Modern satellite surveys and sonar scans confirmed no landmass existed at Emerald Island's coordinates. But the area was a highway for tabular icebergs, massive, flat-topped chunks of glacial ice that calved off Antarctica's coast. These floating monoliths often carry moraines, debris scraped from the continent's bedrock, including dirt, rocks, and even pockets of windblown seeds. Under the right conditions, a berg could briefly sprout a beard of moss or algae, especially near the Balanies, where slightly warmer currents might extend the growing season. To sailors starving for color after months of gray waves and white horizons, even a fleeting patch of green would seem miraculous. Yet Emerald Island's legacy outlasted its debunking. Its name lingers in maritime folklore as a testament to how desperation shapes discovery. When Captain Elliot first logged those verdant cliffs, his crew had been at sea for years, their eyes aching for anything but ice. In such a state, the mind stitches miracles from mist, and therein lies the deeper lesson of phantom islands like this one. They're not just errors, but Rorschach tests for explorers. Every generation projects its own hopes onto the unknown, whether it's the promise of fresh water, the dream of undiscovered species, or simply the need to believe that somewhere in the vast indifference of nature, there's still room for wonder. Today, Emerald Island exists only in the yellowed margins of 19th century logbooks and the occasional retro map sold as a curiosity. But next time you see an iceberg glowing odd colors in the polar light, remember, it's not your eyes deceiving you. It's history whispering that even in the age of satellites, the sea keeps a few secrets, and the best ones are written in vanishing ink. Off the jagged coast of Chile, where the Pacific swells collide with the Andes foothills, a speck of cartographic fiction once clung to maps: Podesta Island. This tiny phantom emerged in 1879, thanks to the Italian whale ship Lydia Podesta, whose crew swore they'd anchored near a small, rocky landmass roughly 500 miles west of Valparaiso. The ship's logs described it as an uninhabited outcrop, barely a blip on the horizon, but enough to warrant a name and a spot on naval charts. For decades, Podesta Island haunted those waters, a persistent footnote in maritime atlases, until the 20th century arrived with better tools and colder truths. The story of Podesta Island isn't about grand myths or lost civilizations. It's a quiet lesson in the fog of human error. Whale ships like the Lydia Podesta operated in a world of relentless motion and limited technology. Dead reckoning, estimating position based on speed and direction, was their primary tool, and a single misjudgment could create an island where none existed. Rocks awash in storm swells, rogue waves cresting like landmasses, even floating debris tangled with seaweed might appear solid from a distance, especially after months at sea. The crew's sighting likely fell into this category, a moment of optical wishfulness where the eye and the ocean conspired to fill in the blanks, but Podesta's persistence reveals a deeper quirk of maritime culture. In the age of sail, verifying remote landfalls was a gamble. One captain's log could spawn an island on maps for generations because the cost of checking was so high. Sending a ship to confirm or deny a tiny, useless rock in the vast Pacific, hardly worth the effort, so Podesta Island lingered, a cartographic ghost, until the rise of aerial surveys and sonar in the mid-20th century finally erased it for good. What makes Podesta stand out among phantom islands is its sheer ordinariness. Unlike Hy-Brasil or Atlantis, it wasn't born from legend or political ambition, just a simple mistake amplified by the logistical challenges of pre-modern exploration. Yet its story echoes a universal truth. Even in our age of satellites and GPS, the ocean still holds pockets of uncertainty. The difference now is that we're better at admitting when we're wrong, or at least we like to think we are. Podesta Island's legacy is a humble reminder that every map is a living document, shaped as much by human fallibility as by the land it tries to capture. And sometimes the smallest errors teach the biggest lessons. In the vast emptiness of the Pacific, where the horizon stretches uninterrupted for thousands of miles, there once lay an island so small it barely earned a dot on the map, yet its disappearance would send astronomers into a frenzy. Sarah Ann Island, a speck of land less than a mile across, was first charted by American whalers in the mid-19th century about 1,200 miles west of the Galapagos. For decades, it appeared in navigational guides as a minor waypoint, notable only for its lonely isolation. But in 1932, this forgotten rock became the star of an international embarrassment when a team of scientists from the California Institute of Technology sailed directly to its coordinates to observe a solar eclipse and found nothing but open ocean. The eclipse expedition had chosen Sarah Ann precisely because its location placed it directly in the path of totality, offering a prime vantage point to study the sun's corona. Newspapers had even announced the discovery of this perfect observation spot. Yet when the research vessel arrived, the island was gone. Not eroded, not submerged, just absent as if scrubbed from existence. The scientists scrambling to salvage their mission ended up observing the eclipse from their rolling ship deck, their instruments wobbling with each wave. Back home, headlines mocked the island that wasn't there, and cartographers quietly erased Sarah Ann from their charts. But the mystery lingered. How does an entire island vanish without a trace? The most plausible explanation is also the simplest. Sarah Ann never existed where maps claimed. 19th century whalers often recorded positions using crude chronometers and celestial navigation, where even slight timing errors could displace an island by miles. Some historians suggest the original sighting was a misidentified seamount, an underwater mountain whose peak might have briefly breached the surface during a low tide or volcanic shift, only to sink back into the abyss. Others argue Sarah Ann was confused with nearby Malden Island, a real atoll with a similar profile. But the most haunting possibility, that Sarah Ann was real and met the fate of many low-lying Pacific islands swallowed whole by rising seas or shaken apart by tectonic activity. What makes Sarah Ann's story more than a quirky footnote is its unexpected role in shaping modern science. the eclipse debacle became a rallying cry for improving navigational accuracy, hastening the adoption of technologies like radio beacons and eventually satellite positioning. It also exposed a sobering truth. Even in the 20th century, our maps were riddled with ghosts. Today, satellites have scanned every inch of that Pacific expanse, confirming Sarah Ann's absence. Yet, like all phantom islands, its legacy lingers not as a failure, but as a reminder that the ocean's greatest trick isn't hiding islands. It's convincing us we ever knew where they were to begin with. Somewhere between the tempestuous waters of the South Atlantic and the volatile geology beneath them, Thompson Island flickered in and out of existence like a candle in the wind. First reported in 1825 by the British whaling captain George Norris, this elusive speck of land was charted roughly 400 miles northeast of the Falkland Islands, a region where the ocean floor bristles with submerged volcanoes and restless tectonic seams. Norris described it as a dark, craggy mass roughly 5 miles across, its cliffs battered by waves with no signs of vegetation or safe anchorage. For decades afterward, other whalers and naval vessels corroborated his account, their logs placing Thompson Island firmly on maps. Yet by the late 19th century, when proper surveys were conducted, the island had vanished as completely as if it had been plucked from the sea by some colossal hand. What makes Thompson Island particularly fascinating isn't just its disappearance, but the tantalizing possibility that it was never a cartographic error at all, just a casualty of Earth's own volatility. Unlike phantom islands born from mirages or wishful thinking, this one might have been shockingly real, only to be erased by the very forces that created it. The region where Norris anchored is part of the Scotia Arc, a fiery necklace of submarine volcanoes and seismic ridges where the South American and Antarctic plates grind against one another. Here, undersea eruptions can birth temporary islands overnight, as molten rock piles up on the seafloor until it breaches the surface. In 1832, just 7 years after Norris's sighting, the nearby Jason Islands were shaken by a volcanic event so violent that sailors reported pillars of smoke and floating pumice fields. Could Thompson Island have been a similar geological flash in the pan, a newborn landmass that crumbled back into the abyss before modern surveys could document it? There's another, equally plausible explanation. The same currents that make the South Atlantic so treacherous also sculpt ephemeral sandbars from the continental shelf. Storms or tides might amass sediment into temporary islands, only for the next gale to scatter them like a child kicking over a sandcastle. In 1898, the German survey ship SMS Falkland swept Thompson Island's coordinates with lead lines and found nothing but deep water, but noted patches of discolored sea and swirling eddies, hints of submerged topography that could have once breached the surface. To whalers like Norris, who relied on visual sightings rather than precise measurements, a low-lying sandbar might have looked like permanent land until the ocean reclaimed it. The enduring mystery of Thompson Island speaks to a broader truth about vanished lands. Sometimes they're not mistakes, but witnesses to Earth's restlessness. Even today, our planet's surface is in constant flux. In 2015, a new island emerged off the coast of Pakistan after a magnitude 7.8 earthquake shoved a seamount above the waves. Japan's Nishinoshima volcano has birthed and reshaped islands multiple times in the past decade. If such phenomena still occur in an era of satellites and instant communication, imagine how many Thompsons might have risen and vanished unnoticed in the age of sail. Perhaps that's why this forgotten Atlantic ghost still matters. It reminds us that maps aren't just records of what we've found. They're snapshots of a world that's always changing, where today's solid ground might be tomorrow's legend. And who knows, somewhere in the deep, the magma that once built Thompson Island might still be stirring, waiting for the right moment to rise again. After all, the ocean never forgets. It just bides its time. Jupiter Reef never sent a single ship to the ocean floor, yet for nearly a century, this phantom hazard loomed in the minds of Caribbean navigators like a submerged blade waiting to gut unwary hulls. First appearing on British Admiralty charts in the early 1800s, this supposed danger was marked northwest of the Bahamas, its jagged outline suggesting a coral labyrinth just waiting to snare vessels. Ships altered courses to avoid it, captains logged anxious sightings, and entire trade routes bent around its coordinates until modern surveys proved the reef was nothing but ink and imagination. How did such a fictional menace embed itself so deeply in maritime history? The answer lies where human fallibility meets the ruthless pragmatism of old-world cartography. Unlike legendary islands born from folklore, Jupiter Reef emerged from something far more mundane, a single sailor's unverified report. In an era when verifying every hazard was impossible, chartmakers operated on a brutal principle: better to err on the side of caution. If one captain scribbled in his log about scraping his keel on unseen rocks, that warning might be immortalized on maps for generations, even if no other ship ever corroborated it. Such vigilance marks were common practice, especially in the Caribbean, where shifting sands and hurricane-tossed debris could create temporary hazards. The irony: these well-intentioned false positives often caused more harm than the reefs themselves. Ships veering wildly to avoid phantom obstacles sometimes ran aground on real ones, their crews blaming uncharted perils rather than the maps that misled them. The reef's name hints at its theatrical origins. Jupiter evokes both the Roman king of gods and the planet associated with luck, a fitting title for a hazard that seemed to toy with sailors' fates. Some historians trace its birth to a misread account of the actual Jupiter Inlet reefs off Florida, mangled by word of mouth across decades of retelling. Others suspect it was a misinterpreted whaleback rock or a sunken timber temporarily exposed at low tide. By the time the error was recognized, Jupiter Reef had taken on a life of its own. Each new edition of a chart copied the previous one's flaws, and the reef sank deeper into nautical consciousness. The reef's eventual debunking came courtesy of steel hulls and steam power. As ships grew sturdier and surveys more precise in the late 19th century, the British Navy dispatched vessels to scout Jupiter Reef's coordinates with lead lines and explosives. They found only open water stretching hundreds of feet deep, yet even then, removing it from maps sparked controversy. Veteran sailors swore they'd felt its teeth graze their hulls, while insurers argued that keeping dubious hazards on charts was cheaper than paying for wrecks caused by their removal. It wasn't until the 1930s that Jupiter Reef finally faded from official records, a testament to how deeply fear etches itself onto maps. What makes Jupiter Reef so emblematic isn't just its fiction, but its function. These invented hazards were the fake news of their day, warnings that outlived their truth because the cost of disbelief was too high. Today, satellites have stripped the Caribbean of such ghosts, but their legacy lingers in how we navigate risk. Every "here be dragons" on an old map whispers the same uneasy truth. Sometimes we'd rather sail around a nightmare than stare into the emptiness and admit there was never anything there at all. Among the scattered jewels of the Pacific, where the ocean's blue stretches unbroken for thousands of miles, there once bloomed a cartographic mirage as lush as its name promised: Los Jardines, the gardens. First charted by Spanish explorers in the early 1600s, these mythical islands were said to lie near the Marshall Islands, their shores bursting with fragrant spices and towering palms. Sailors whispered of anchorages where fresh water bubbled from hidden springs and the very air smelled of cinnamon. For over 2 centuries, Los Jardines drifted across maps, a tantalizing way station for galleons weary of the Manila-Acapulco trade route. Yet, like so many phantom islands, these gardens of the imagination eventually withered under scrutiny, leaving behind a trail of spice-scented dreams and a question: how did such a vivid fantasy take root in the harsh reality of Pacific navigation? The answer lies in the collision of European ambition and the Pacific's vast, deceptive beauty. Spanish captains racing to dominate the spice trade often mistook low-lying atolls for the fabled Isles of Spice described in vague medieval texts. The Marshall Islands, with their ring-shaped coral reefs and occasional bursts of vegetation, could easily be misread as fragments of a larger paradise, especially through the haze of exhaustion and scurvy. Some historians argue Los Jardines was a misplotting of Likip or Watch Atoll, where groves of pandanus and coconut palms might briefly resemble the jungles of the East Indies from a distance. Others suggest it was a composite error, blending sightings of multiple atolls into a single, exaggerated landmass. The most intriguing theory, that Spanish navigators, desperate to justify their voyages to skeptical crown financiers, embellished their logs with descriptions of fertile lands ripe for colonization, turning sparse coral outcrops into legend. What kept Los Jardines alive in the cartographic imagination wasn't just wishful thinking, it was the economics of empire. The Spanish Empire's Pacific routes were grueling marathons, with ships often spending months without resupply. The idea of a verdant pit stop, a place to repair hulls and replenish supplies, was too seductive to abandon, even as failed expeditions piled up. Dutch and British maps, eager to undermine Spanish claims, often included Los Jardines but labeled them doubtful or disputed, turning the islands into a geopolitical football. By the 1800s, improved navigation tools and the blunt truth of empty ocean finally erased Los Jardines from maps, but not before they'd inspired one last bizarre twist. In the early 19th century, rumors circulated that Los Jardines was actually a coded reference to the Spice Islands of Indonesia, a deliberate misdirection by Spain to throw off rival traders. While this conspiracy lacks evidence, it speaks to the enduring power of the phantom. Even in death, Los Jardines refused to be just another cartographic error. It became a Rorschach test for imperial fantasies, a blank space onto which generations projected their desires for wealth, respite, and dominion over the unknown. Today, satellites have stripped the Pacific of such mysteries, but the legacy of Los Jardines lingers. It reminds us that maps are never just records of land and sea, they're also records of hunger. The hunger for resources, for glory, for a moment's rest in an endless blue wilderness. And perhaps that's why we still chase phantom islands, both literal and metaphorical. Not because we expect to find them, but because the search itself tells us who we are and who we once believed we could be. Where the mighty Ganges River spills into the Bay of Bengal, its muddy waters once birthed a cartographic spectre. Ganges Island, a phantom that clung to maps for nearly a century despite never truly existing. First appearing on French and British charts in the early 1700s, this elusive landmass was often drawn as a smudge of earth near the river's mouth, sometimes labeled as a stopping point for traders navigating the treacherous delta. Unlike the dramatic legends of Hy-Brasil or the political firestorm around Bermuda, Ganges Island's story is one of quiet deception, a testament to how the natural chaos of river deltas can trick even the most meticulous mapmakers. The roots of this geographic ghost lie in the Ganges Delta's restless nature. Here, silt carried from the Himalayas collides with tidal forces, creating ever-shifting sandbanks that rise and vanish with the seasons. A sandbar visible at low tide might disappear by dawn, while storms can sculpt temporary islands from accumulated debris. Dutch and Portuguese traders, threading their way through these labyrinthine waters in the 17th century, often logged new land sightings that later expeditions couldn't replicate. One particularly stubborn shoal, likely exposed during an unusual dry season or a monsoon lull, probably inspired the original Ganges Island myth. Sailors desperate for safe anchorage in the delta's maze would have clung to any hint of solid ground, even if the next high tide erased it. But Ganges Island's persistence reveals a darker truth about colonial cartography. European mapmakers racing to assert control over India's lucrative trade routes often copied each other's charts without local verification. Bengali fishermen and merchants had navigated the delta for millennia, understanding its transient landscapes intimately, yet their knowledge was routinely ignored. When British surveyors finally mapped the region in detail during the late 1700s, they found no island at Ganges' mouth, just a sprawling, morphing network of channels and mudflats. Their island was quietly scrubbed from official records, though some regional maps kept it as late as 1850, a relic of outdated data. What makes Ganges Island uniquely poignant is its connection to climate. Modern studies show the Bengal Delta is among the world's most dynamic landscapes, with rising sea levels and increased sedimentation accelerating its transformations. Islands really do emerge and vanish here, just not where or when old charts claimed. In 2008, a new landmass named South Talpatti briefly surfaced in satellite images near the India-Bangladesh border, sparking a sovereignty dispute before melting back into the sea. This ongoing geological theater makes Ganges Island more than a mistake. It's a preview of how coastlines worldwide might rewrite themselves in the climate era. The Phantom's legacy lingers in the way we still underestimate nature's fluidity. Even today, maps struggle to capture the delta's ever-shifting reality, just as they once invented islands to fill the gaps in understanding. Ganges Island reminds us that some places refuse to be pinned down, not because they're mythical, but because the earth itself is still telling their story. And in that muddy, churning waterway, the line between land and legend will always be as slippery as the tides. Off the sun-baked coast of Western Australia, where the Indian Ocean hammers the continental shelf, sailors once whispered warnings about Pactolus Bank, a hidden dagger of coral and rock said to lurk just beneath the waves. First charted in 1840 by the British survey ship HMS Beagle, the same vessel that carried Darwin into scientific immortality, this submerged menace was marked on maps for decades as a ship killer waiting to gut unwary hulls. Captains steered wide of its coordinates, their logs fretting over discolored water and sudden shallows. Yet when modern sonar finally scanned the seafloor in the 1970s, the truth was undeniable. Pactolus Bank didn't exist. The ocean here plunged deep and smooth, with not so much as a pebble to justify a century of caution. How did such a stubborn myth take root? The answer lies in the beguiling tricks of light, water, and human fallibility that once made phantom banks as common as sea spray. Early hydrographers like those aboard the Beagle worked with tools we'd now consider laughably crude. To measure depth, they dropped weighted lines called lead lines overboard, counting how much rope paid out before the lead hit bottom. In turbulent seas or strong currents, these readings could be wildly inaccurate. A swell might lift the ship just as the lead touched a slope, making the seafloor seem shallower than it was. Worse, sunlight filtering through waves could paint illusory shadows on the seabed, tricking lookouts into reporting submerged plateaus. Pactolus Bank likely began as one such trick of the light, compounded by a misplotted sounding or a fleeting sandbar shifted by storms. Once etched onto Admiralty charts, such errors became gospel, copied by generations of mapmakers too cautious to erase unverified hazards. But Pactolus Bank's story isn't just about old tools, it's about the psychology of navigation. Sailors, aware the sea could kill them in minutes, prioritized survival over skepticism. If one ship reported a hazard, others would avoid it blindly rather than risk testing its existence. This collective caution created a paradox. The more ships detoured around Pactolus Bank, the fewer chances there were to disprove it. The bank grew more real with each avoided collision, its legend cemented by absence rather than evidence. Only when post-war sonar transformed hydrography did these phantom banks start falling like dominoes. The same technology that revealed lost shipwrecks also erased imaginary ones, proving the ocean floor wasn't half as cluttered as mariners had feared. What makes Pactolus Bank emblematic is its quiet afterlife. Unlike glamorous phantom islands, this vanished shoal left no room for romantic speculation, just a bureaucratic paper trail of corrected maps and shrugged shoulders. Yet its ghost lingers in modern maritime law, where vigilance areas still mark unconfirmed hazards as a hedge against liability. Even today, when GPS pinpoints every reef with surgical precision, we carve out spaces for the unknown, a silent tribute to the Pactolus banks of history. Because the ocean's greatest lesson isn't just about the dangers we can see, it's about the ones we're brave enough to admit we imagined. Rica de Oro, a rich in gold, wasn't just another phantom island. It was the glittering crown jewel of Pacific legends, a place where the myths of El Dorado collided with the ruthless ambitions of empire. For over 2 centuries, Spanish galleons and Japanese merchant ships scoured the waters east of the Philippines, chasing whispers of an island where golden nuggets lay scattered like pebbles on the beach. First appearing on maps in the late 1600s, Rica de Oro was often drawn alongside its twin, Rica de Plata, rich in silver, as if the ocean itself had split the treasure into 2 perfect halves. Spanish captains, desperate to reverse their empire's declining fortunes, diverted entire fleets to search for it. Japanese adventurers, barred by isolationist policies from foreign trade, reportedly smuggled themselves onto ships bound for its shores. Yet despite the frenzy, no one could agree on where or even if this gilded paradise truly existed. The island's origins trace back to the same fever dreams that birthed El Dorado. As Spanish conquistadors emptied the Americas of precious metals, rumors swirled of even greater riches waiting in the Pacific. Some scholars believe Rica de Oro began as a garbled account of the Philippines' own gold-rich regions, like Luzon's Paracale mines, exaggerated through retellings across storm-racked decks. Others tie it to Minami Shima, a real but barren atoll over 900 miles east of Tokyo. Spanish records from the 1700s describe Minami Shima's discovery by a navigator named Bernardo de la Torre, who mistook its guano-crusted rocks for gold-laden cliffs in the twilight, a misperception that snowballed into myth. What kept Rica de Oro alive, though, was its tantalizing plausibility. The Pacific does hold gold, just not as imagined. Submarine volcanoes spew precious metals into the ocean floor, and scattered atolls occasionally reveal traces of mineral wealth. In the 1800s, a trader named Savory claimed to have bartered for Rican gold with islanders, presenting Spanish officials with flakes that later proved to be pyrite fool's gold. The revelation didn't kill the legend, it just forced it to evolve. By the 19th century, Rica de Oro had morphed into a geopolitical pawn. Japan, emerging from isolation, cited the island in disputes over uninhabited territories, while Spanish maps clung to it as a fading symbol of imperial pride. Modern oceanography has since stripped the Pacific of such fantasies. Minami Shima, now a Japanese weather station, sits alone in its corner of the sea, its only gold the sunlight glaring off its concrete docks. Yet Rica de Oro's legacy lingers in the way we still project our desires onto blank spaces. Every investor scouring the ocean floor for rare minerals, every deep-sea miner dreaming of underwater bonanzas, walks in the footsteps of those Spanish sailors, still half convinced that somewhere beyond the horizon, the waves part to reveal a shore where wealth washes up like driftwood. The truth, as always, is murkier. The real treasure was never the gold. It was the stubborn, starved hope that kept men sailing into the unknown long after logic said to turn back. The story of vanished islands isn't just about blank spaces on old maps, it's about the restless pulse of human curiosity itself. These phantom lands, whether born from mirages, mistakes, or outright myths, reveal something fundamental, our hunger to fill the unknown with stories, even when the truth eludes us. For centuries, sailors risked their lives chasing shores that didn't exist. Cartographers inked fantasies onto parchment, and entire nations staked claims on fog and waves. Yet in their failure, they left behind something more valuable than gold, a testament to the audacity of exploration, the fragility of knowledge, and the stubborn refusal to accept that the world might ever be fully known. What makes these legends endure isn't their geography, but what they tell us about ourselves. Hy-Brasil and Antillia weren't just islands, they were promises of refuge, riches, or redemption. Sandy Island and Bermuda weren't mere errors, they were mirrors reflecting how easily institutions cling to collective illusions. Even as satellites strip the planet of its mysteries, these lost lands linger in our imagination, reminders that every era has its edges, its own versions of "here be dragons." The irony is delicious. The very islands that never existed shaped real history, redirecting voyages, sparking disputes, and even altering the borders of nations. But perhaps the most haunting lesson is how fluid the line between myth and reality can be. Atlantis inspired Nazi obsession and Hollywood blockbusters. Thule became a Nazi occult symbol and a U.S. airbase. Frisland, a Venetian brothers' tall tale, once warped the course of British exploration. These weren't harmless fictions, they were catalysts proving that imagination, unchecked by evidence, can rewrite the world. Yet they also speak to something noble, the courage to sail beyond the map's edge, even when the only thing waiting is the abyss. So what's left to discover? The ocean's surface may be charted, but its stories are far from exhausted. Every vanished island whispers a challenge to question what we think we know, to embrace the gaps in our understanding, and to keep searching, not just for lost lands, but for the truths they once stood for. Which of these phantoms fascinates you most? Have you ever stumbled upon a modern-day sandy island, a place that exists only until you look closer? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you love unraveling history's enigmas, hit subscribe. The world's still full of mysteries, some buried, some imagined, and some waiting for you to uncover them.